Marcus Devlin had not slept well in 3 months, and he was not planning to start tonight either. He sat in his kitchen in a small house in the hills of West Virginia, with a laptop that was older than some of the kids on his street, and a cup of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago. The mines were gone, and that was the simple truth of it. When the aliens made first contact 7 years ago, everybody thought it would be about peace and knowledge, and all that beautiful stuff they show in movies. But nobody told the people of Appalachia that the first real consequence of meeting alien civilizations would be the complete and total death of the mining industry. Turns out when you can import rare earth elements from asteroid belts halfway across the galaxy for a fraction of the cost, then nobody needs a guy with a pickaxe and an engineering degree from a state college. So Marcus lost his job, and then he lost his savings, and then he almost lost the house. And now, he spent his nights doing the only thing that still gave him a spark of something that felt like hope. He browsed Galnet. Galnet was the interstellar commerce and communication network that connected thousands of species across hundreds of star systems. And it had a marketplace that made the old internet auction sites look like a kid selling lemonade on the sidewalk. Most of the stuff on there was junk or overpriced, or built for creatures with 6 arms and no spine. But every now and then, you could find something interesting if you knew where to look. And Marcus always looked. Tonight he was scrolling through a liquidation auction from something called the Tiangong Cluster Judiciary, which appeared to be a galactic court that seized assets from alien criminals and sold them off to the highest bidder. Most of the listings were boring, and he did not understand half of the alien words even with the translator running. But then he stopped scrolling, and his finger froze over the trackpad. The listing read Shenzhou Prime Class Deep Core Excavator, and then in smaller text it said miniaturized model, and then 1/1600th scale functional replica. The starting bid was listed as 0.0003 galactic standard credits. Marcus ran the conversion in his head, and then ran it again, because he was sure he made a mistake. $47. He knew what a Shenzhou Prime was because every former miner on Earth knew what a Shenzhou Prime was, and it was the kind of thing that made grown men who used to drive haul trucks sit down and feel very small. The Shenzhou Prime was a kilometer-long excavation vessel built by the Valhari Concord, which was the biggest mining corporation in the known galaxy, and these ships could hollow out entire moons and crack open planetary crusts like eggs, and harvest the cores for every useful element down to the atomic level. One of those ships was worth more than the entire economic output of Earth for a decade. But this was a miniaturized replica, and the word replica made Marcus think it was probably just a fancy model like a toy, and the price made him think it was probably a scam. But the listing had a green verification badge from Galnet Escrow, which meant the item was real and the transaction was protected, and if it turned out to be fake, he would get his money back. Marcus stared at the screen for a long time. $47. He had spent more than that on worse bets. He clicked the bid button. Nobody else bid against him, which should have been his second warning, but Marcus was tired and a little bit reckless, and 3 days later when the alien delivery drone descended from the sky and dropped a crate on his front porch, he had almost forgotten about it. The crate was about the size of a washing machine, and it was made of some dark metallic material that was cool to the touch even though it was July in West Virginia, and everything else was hot enough to fry bacon on. He dragged it inside and pried it open with a crowbar, and inside was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in his life. It sat in a bed of anti-gravity packing foam that made it hover slightly when he pulled the lid away, and it was about 60 centimeters long and shaped like a sleek angular vessel with a dark metallic blue hull covered in tiny alien script that glowed faintly gold. At the front was a rotating drill array with multiple nested heads that looked like they could chew through anything, and at the back were 4 engine pods that pulsed with a soft white light, and through a transparent section of the hull near the center, he could see a reactor core, no bigger than a marble that glowed with a steady blue-green fire. It was not a toy. Marcus could feel it in his bones, the same way an old miner can feel the difference between a prop and a real drill, just by the weight and the hum. And it was humming, a low, steady vibration that he felt more in his chest than his ears, like the thing was alive and waiting. He reached out and touched it, and the moment his fingers made contact with the hull, the entire ship lit up, and a holographic interface projected from a tiny emitter on the dorsal fin, spreading out across his kitchen table like a glowing blueprint made of light. Alien text scrolled across the display, and then his universal translator module, which was plugged into his laptop, caught the signal and began converting. Welcome to the Shenzhou Prime Class Deep Core Excavator Registration Interface. Marcus read the words 3 times. Scanning new operator and biometric registration in progress and species, identified as human and origin world Sol 3 and designation Earth. Please confirm operator registration. Marcus whispered the word yes, and he was not sure why he whispered it. Registration confirmed and full mining license activated, and all primary systems online and phase, fold compression stable and quantum drill, array nominal and faster than light drive standing by. Marcus sat down very slowly in his kitchen chair. The holographic display shifted, and a tiny figure appeared projected above the ship, and it was a miniature representation of what he assumed was a Valhari, and it was about 2 centimeters tall with 4 arms and a round head and large dark eyes, and it wore what looked like a tiny hard hat. This was the ship AI. It spoke in a cheerful tone that the translator rendered in a friendly female voice. All systems are operational, Captain, and this vessel is equipped with a Class 7 quantum drill array capable of penetrating materials up to and including neutron degenerate matter, and a dimensional compression cargo hold with an effective internal volume of 14,000 cubic meters, and a phase fold faster than light drive rated for transgalactic transit. Marcus just stared at the tiny hologram. The AI continued with the same cheerful energy. It should be noted that this vessel is not a replica, and the listing description was translated imprecisely, and this is a fully functional Shenzhou Prime Deep Core Excavator, compressed to miniaturized scale via Valhari phase fold technology, and all capabilities are identical to the full-size vessel. Marcus looked at the ship sitting on his kitchen table between his cold coffee and a stack of unpaid bills. It was the size of a loaf of bread. It could eat a moon. The AI tilted its tiny holographic head and said one more thing. Welcome aboard, Captain, and where would you like to mine first? Marcus Devlin sat alone in his kitchen in the hills of West Virginia at 2 in the morning, and he started to laugh. He laughed until his sides hurt, and then he laughed some more because the universe had just handed a broke unemployed coal miner the most powerful mining tool in the known galaxy, and it fit in a backpack. He did not know what he was going to do with it yet. But for the first time in 3 months, he could not wait to find out. Marcus did not sleep that night, and he did not sleep the next night either, because every time he closed his eyes, he saw that little blue ship humming on his kitchen table, and his brain would not shut up about what it could do. On the 3rd morning, he decided that thinking about it was not going to be enough. He needed to see it work for real. He loaded the ship into a padded backpack along with his laptop and translator module, and he drove his old truck 40 minutes down a dirt road to an abandoned strip mine that had been closed for 6 years. The place was a scar on the earth with exposed rock faces and rusted equipment and puddles of orange water that smelled like iron and regret. Nobody came out here anymore. It was perfect. Marcus set the ship down on the hood of his truck and opened the holographic interface, and the little AI avatar appeared immediately, standing at attention with its tiny hard hat and 4 arms folded behind its back. He had started calling the AI Zhen because the full designation was a string of alien characters that sounded like someone gargling gravel, and Zhen seemed close enough. "Luffy. Zhen," he said, "I want you to target that rock face over there and run a standard extraction." Zhen tilted her holographic head and asked what depth and what materials, and Marcus said, "Surprise me." The ship lifted off the hood of the truck without a sound. It rose straight up about 3 meters and then oriented itself toward the granite cliff face 200 meters away, and Marcus watched through a pair of binoculars as the tiny vessel, which was no bigger than a house cat, accelerated to a speed that made it blur. The quantum drill array at the nose began to spin, and it emitted a light so white and pure that Marcus had to look away for a second. Then the ship hit the rock. There was no explosion and no crash and no dust cloud. The ship simply entered the granite like a hot knife sliding into butter, and it vanished inside the cliff face. Marcus waited. 60 seconds later, the ship emerged from a perfectly round tunnel opening that was 2 meters in diameter and 30 meters deep, and the walls of the tunnel were polished smooth like glass. The little vessel flew back to his truck and landed gently on the hood, and a small hatch on its belly opened and deposited a neatly compressed cube of material about the size of a basketball. Marcus picked it up, and it was surprisingly heavy and warm. Zhen projected a breakdown of the contents onto the holographic display. The cube contained sorted and separated raw minerals including silicon and aluminum and iron, and trace amounts of copper and titanium. And at the bottom of the list, in glowing gold text, it said carbon, and next to that it said, including 412 carats of industrial-grade diamond. Marcus set the cube down very carefully. Then he sent the ship back in. By the end of the afternoon, the Shenzhou Prime had bored 17 tunnels into the abandoned mine site, and it had extracted and sorted more raw material than the mine had produced in its last 5 years of operation combined. The total estimated value, according to Zhen, was approximately $1.2 million in Earth currency. Marcus sat on the tailgate of his truck and ate a sandwich and stared at the neat row of mineral cubes lined up on the ground, and he thought about all the years he had spent underground with a headlamp and a drill that weighed more than he did, and how the best day he ever had in the mines did not come close to what this tiny ship had done in a single afternoon. The next problem was money. Not making it, but moving it. Marcus was smart enough to know that if a broke, unemployed miner from West Virginia suddenly showed up trying to sell a pile of industrial diamonds and rare earth elements, then people would ask questions, and those questions would lead to more questions, and eventually someone with a badge or a briefcase would come knocking. He reached out to a man named Gio Beretti, who was a discreet broker he had known from his mining days, and Gio was the kind of guy who could move unusual product without making noise. Gio looked at the minerals and looked at Marcus and said, "Where did you get these?" And Marcus said, "It is better if you do not ask." Gio sold a small batch through back channels and deposited the money into an offshore account, and told Marcus to be very careful because both Earth governments and alien trade guilds monitored resource flows. And if he flooded the market with material like this, then somebody with more power than either of them would come asking. Marcus took the warning seriously. He also started digging into the original auction listing for the Shenzhou Prime, because the question that had been nagging him since day one had only gotten louder. Why was it so cheap? The answer came from Galnet public court records, which Zhen helped him access and translate. The ship had been seized as evidence in a massive corporate fraud investigation involving the Valhari Concord and a subsidiary that had been running illegal mining operations in a protected star system. The court had confiscated the vessel and dozens of others and auctioned them off as part of the settlement, and the Shenzhou Prime had been listed in a bulk lot of miniaturized equipment that nobody paid attention to because most buyers assumed miniaturized meant non-functional. The Valhari Concord had tried to buy it back quietly through shell companies, but the court had flagged their bids and blocked them. And by the time the auction went live, the listing had been buried under 10,000 other items, and the only person who found it was a sleepless human in West Virginia who was too stubborn to stop scrolling. But now the Concord knew. Galnet purchase records were public, and the moment Marcus registered as the new operator, his name and species and home world became visible to anyone who looked. And the Valhari Concord was looking. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning while Marcus was drinking his coffee. It came through the official Galnet communication channel, and it was written in formal legal language that the translator rendered in stiff, precise English. To Marcus Devlin, human registered operator of Shenzhou Prime Class, Excavator Unit 774-9. This communication is from the legal division of the Valhari Concord. It has come to our attention that you have acquired a vessel that is the rightful property of the Valhari Concord and was sold in error through a judicial proceeding that is currently under appeal. We demand the immediate return of this vessel to Valhari custody, and failure to comply will result in litigation before the Galactic Trade Court and potential sanctions against your species' trade account. This matter is not negotiable. Regards, and the name that followed was a string of alien characters that Marcus did not bother to read. He set down his coffee. He read the message again slowly. Then he thought about every mining company that had ever come through West Virginia and promised jobs and prosperity, and then stripped the mountains bare and left behind nothing but poverty and poison water, and moved on to do the same thing somewhere else. He thought about the foreman who told him his job was eliminated by a memo. He thought about the aliens who showed up with their technology and their trade deals and made his entire way of life obsolete overnight without even knowing his name. Marcus sat there for a long time, and then he opened the reply interface and he typed a single word. No. He hit send and finished his coffee and went outside to check on his ship. The tiny vessel sat on its landing pad, humming in the morning light, and Marcus looked at it and said, "We have got a fight coming, Jen." The little holographic AI appeared and tilted her head and said, "I have reviewed the Valhari Concord legal filing, Captain, and I believe the correct human phrase for this situation is bring it on." Marcus laughed. It was the first time the AI had made a joke, and it would not be the last. The Valhari Concord did not waste time. Within 48 hours of Marcus sending his one-word reply, they filed a formal claim in the Galactic Trade Court, demanding the immediate seizure and return of the Shenzhou Prime excavator, along with all materials extracted by the vessel, and a fine against Marcus personally for what they called unauthorized operation of proprietary Valhari technology. The filing was 7,000 pages long. Marcus read the summary that Jen translated, and then he sat down at his kitchen table and did something that nobody in the history of the galaxy expected a human to do. He asked Jen to pull up the complete Galactic Trade Code. The full document was 4.6 million pages of legal text written in 17 languages and covering every trade law and regulation and precedent established since the formation of the Galactic Trade Authority 9,000 years ago. Marcus could not read all of it, and he did not try. Instead, he had Jen summarize each section and flag anything related to vessel ownership and salvage rights and court auction procedures and property transfer law. It took him 11 days. He barely ate and he barely slept, and he drank so much coffee that his hands shook. But by the end of it, he had found what he was looking for. It was buried in Section 912 of the Galactic Salvage and Reclamation Act, and it stated in very clear language that any vessel sold through a verified judicial auction and operated continuously by its registered owner for a period of 90 standard galactic days, would become the irrevocable legal property of that owner, and no prior claim could override the transfer. 90 days. Marcus counted backward from the day he registered as operator and forward to the deadline, and he had 79 days left. That was the good news. The bad news was that the Valhari conquered almost certainly knew about this rule, and that was why they were moving so fast, because if they could get the ship seized or force Marcus to stop operating it for day 90, then the ownership would not lock in and they could take it back. So Marcus made a decision. He was not going to hide, and he was not going to wait. He was going to work. The first thing he did was move his operations off Earth entirely. Using the Shenzhou Prime faster-than-light drive, which Zhen operated remotely through a quantum-entangled communication link, Marcus sent the little ship out into the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. The belt was classified as unclaimed territory under galactic law, which meant anyone could mine there as long as they filed the proper claim markers, and Marcus had Zhen file 1,200 claims in a single afternoon. Then the ship went to work. The Shenzhou Prime was 60 centimeters long, and it weighed less than a large dog, but it could eat asteroids. It would fly to a target rock and bore into it, and extract every useful element and compress the material into its dimensional cargo hold, and then fly back to a collection point where it would deposit neat cubes of sorted minerals before heading out for another run. It made hundreds of runs per day. Other species used fleet operations with dozens of full-sized ships and thousands of crew members to mine asteroid belts, and here was a single vessel the size of a shoebox doing the same work faster and more efficiently, because it was small and quick and did not need to slow down for anything. Marcus watched the operation from his kitchen table through the holographic interface, and he felt something he had not felt in years. He felt like a miner again. But he was not content to just run the ship as it was. Marcus was an engineer, and engineers do not leave things alone. The Valhari built beautiful technology, but they built it conservatively, and they built it to spec, and they never deviated from the original design, because that was not how Valhari culture worked. Humans were different. Marcus started modifying the ship. First, he rewrote the extraction algorithms using human optimization mathematics that he had learned in college and applied during his years in the mines. And Zhen initially resisted the changes because they deviated from Valhari standard operating procedures. But when the new algorithms increased extraction efficiency by 340%, the AI went very quiet for a long time, and then said, "Captain, that should not be possible." Marcus grinned and said, "You have never met a human engineer before, have you?" Next, he rigged a secondary communications array using parts from a gutted smartphone and a cheap radio transmitter he bought online, and this gave the ship a backup link that operated on human radio frequencies, which the Valhari could not easily intercept or jam. Then he used a 3D printer to build custom drone attachments that clipped onto the ship exterior and allowed it to carry external payloads that did not fit in the cargo hold. Zhen watched all of this with what Marcus could only describe as horrified fascination. "Captain," she said, "Valhari engineers do not modify their vessels, and this is not standard, and these attachments are not rated, and this communications array is held together with adhesive tape." Marcus said, "It is called duct tape, and it is one of humanity's greatest inventions, and it works." The modifications were ugly and crude compared to the elegant Valhari engineering, but they worked, and they worked well, and Marcus could feel the ship performing better every day, like a racehorse that had been running with weights strapped to its legs, and someone had finally taken them off. Word began to spread on Galnet. The alien communication networks were full of chatter about the human in the Sol system, who had bought a miniaturized Valhari excavator for pocket change. and was now outperforming full-scale mining operations with a ship you could carry in a backpack. Independent miners from other species reached out to Marcus asking questions, and some of them asked if they could hire him and colony worlds that could not afford Valhari prices sent messages asking if he could help them extract resources from their own planets. Marcus read every message and replied to all of them, and something began to form in his mind that was bigger than just making money. But that would come later, because right now he had a more immediate problem. The Valhari conquered had run out of patience with the legal system. On day 73, Marcus received an alert from Zhen that a vessel had entered the Sol system through the outer transit gate. It was a Valhari gunship called the Prophet Margin, and it was 400 meters long, and it was armed, and it was heading for the asteroid belt. Zhen displayed the ship profile on the holographic interface, and Marcus looked at it and felt his stomach drop, because it was enormous compared to his little excavator, and it carried weapons and shields and a crew of 200 Valhari operatives. Their mission, according to the Galnet filing they were required to submit, was asset recovery. They were coming to take his ship back by force. Marcus had 17 days left on the clock. He stood up from his kitchen table and walked outside and looked up at the sky where, somewhere very far away, a gunship was burning toward him, and his tiny ship was out there alone in the dark between the rocks. He had 17 days, and no weapons, and no army, and no fleet. But he had a ship that could eat through anything, and he had an engineer brain that never stopped working, and he had 73 days of tunnels already carved into the asteroids. Marcus smiled, and it was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who grew up in coal country, where the mountains were full of tunnels, and the people who lived there knew every single one of them. He went back inside and opened the holographic interface. "Zhen," he said, "we are going to need to do some renovations." The AI appeared and looked at him and said, "Captain, are you planning what I think you are planning?" Marcus cracked his knuckles and said, "Zhen, I am going to turn that asteroid into the most complicated piece of Swiss cheese the galaxy has ever seen, and when those Valhari come looking for us, they are going to wish they had stayed home." Zhen was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I have run the calculations, Captain, and based on our current drilling speed and the asteroid composition, we can create approximately 412 kilometers of tunnel network in 17 days. Marcus nodded. "Then let us get started," he said. The little ship lifted off from its pad and vanished into the sky, and somewhere out in the asteroid belt, the real work began. The Prophet Margin arrived in the asteroid belt on day 76, and it came in fast and loud with its scanners blazing across every frequency like a searchlight sweeping through a dark room. Commander Valith Su stood on the bridge of the gunship and looked out at the field of tumbling rocks and ice and dust, and she was not impressed. She had been told that a single human operating a miniaturized excavator had been causing the Valhari conquered significant financial and legal embarrassment, and her orders were simple: find the ship and recover it and bring it back to Valhari space before the 90-day ownership threshold was reached. She had 200 crew members and a ship bristling with tractor beams and scanner arrays and military-grade sensors that could detect a grain of sand at 10,000 kilometers. Finding one tiny excavator in an asteroid field should have taken minutes. It did not. The scanners swept the belt and came back with nothing. The Shenzhou Prime was 60 centimeters long and running on minimal power in the shadow of an asteroid that Marcus had specifically chosen, because its mineral composition was dense with sensor-reflective metals that scattered scanning beams like a mirror ball scatters light. The gunship could not see the tiny vessel, and it could not pinpoint its location, and every time the sensors got close, the signal bounced and scattered into noise. Commander Valith ordered her crew to deploy search drones, and within an hour 200 small autonomous probes spread out across the asteroid field scanning every rock and crevice. This was where Marcus had been waiting. He sat in his kitchen in West Virginia with the holographic interface spread across his table like a glowing war map, and he watched the drone positions update in real time because Zhen had tapped into the Valhari communication frequency, using the backup radio array Marcus had built from a phone and duct tape. The Valhari encrypted their signals, but their encryption was designed to stop other Valhari from eavesdropping, and it had never been tested against human code breaking methods, and Marcus had downloaded a free decryption program from a human hacker forum that cracked it in about 40 seconds. He could see everything they were doing. The search drones entered the asteroid belt and began scanning larger rocks, and when the first wave of 12 drones approached the asteroid that Marcus had turned into his base of operations, they flew into the tunnel entrances and began mapping the interior. Marcus let them in. He let them fly deep into the tunnel network that the Shenzhou Prime had carved over the past weeks, and the drones mapped passage after passage and chamber after chamber, going deeper and deeper into the rock. Then Marcus gave Zhen the signal. The Shenzhou Prime, which had been hiding in a side tunnel, no wider than a dinner plate, activated its quantum drill, and in 3 seconds it carved through the rock behind the drones and collapsed the tunnel ceiling. The 12 drones were trapped in a dead end, surrounded by solid rock with no signal and no way out. Marcus watched their icons blink and then go dark on his display. Commander Valith lost contact with 12 drones simultaneously, and she did not understand what had happened, and she sent more. Marcus did the same thing again. And again. Each time the drones entered the tunnel network, the Shenzhou Prime would wait until they were deep inside, and then it would collapse passages and seal exits and redirect tunnels, so that the drones flew in circles until their power ran out. In some cases, Marcus had the ship strip mine the rock around the drones so quickly that they fell into sudden voids and crashed at the bottom of freshly carved pits. He never destroyed a single drone. He just made them all completely useless. By the end of the first day, Commander Valith had lost 147 drones and had exactly 0 information about where the Shenzhou Prime was hiding. She stood on her bridge and stared at the tactical display, and she said something in Valhari that the universal translator rendered as, "What is this human doing?" What Marcus was doing was fighting the way his ancestors had fought in the mountains of Appalachia for 300 years. He was using the terrain. The Valhari military doctrine was built for engagements between ships of comparable size in open space, where superior firepower and numbers won the day, and they had no protocol and no training and no experience fighting something they could not see in a maze of tunnels inside a rock. It was like sending a battleship to catch a mouse in a coal mine. And the mouse knew every tunnel. On day 78, something unexpected happened. Marcus had been posting updates on Galnet because Zhen had pointed out that public attention was a form of legal protection, and within 2 days his story had gone viral across the galaxy. The human who bought a miniature spaceship for $47 and was now playing hide and seek with a corporate gunship in an asteroid belt. Independent miners from dozens of species sent messages of support, and some of them sent more than messages. A Kruthite communications expert sent Marcus a set of jamming codes, specifically tuned to Valhari military frequencies. A collective of Drenari hackers flooded the profit margin scanners with false signals that made it look like there were thousands of tiny ships scattered across the belt. A retired judge from the Kruthite High Court filed an emergency injunction with the Galactic Trade Authority, declaring that the Valhari conquered could not use weapons or military force in a zone where an active ownership dispute was pending. The injunction was granted within hours. Commander Valith received the legal notice, and she read it very carefully, and she understood that she could not fire her weapons, and she could not use her tractor beams aggressively, and she was stuck. But she was also stubborn. On day 82, she made a decision that would cost the Valhari conquered far more than the price of one miniaturized excavator. She ordered the profit margin to begin strip mining Marcus asteroid. If she could not go into the tunnels, then she would destroy the tunnels by mining the entire asteroid down to nothing, and the Shenzhou Prime would have nowhere to hide. The profit margin powered up its own mining arrays and began carving into the asteroid from the outside. This was a violation of the injunction. Marcus knew it would happen because he had studied the Valhari conquered corporate culture, and he knew that their commanders were promoted based on results and demoted based on failure, and Valeth could not go home empty-handed. He had been counting on it. Zhen had been recording everything from the moment the profit margin entered the Sol system, and the footage was crystal clear, and time-stamped and authenticated by Galnet protocols. Marcus uploaded the footage of the profit margin strip, mining a claimed asteroid in a disputed ownership zone, in direct violation of a Galactic Trade Authority injunction. He uploaded it to every Galnet news channel and social platform simultaneously. The galaxy watched. Within 6 hours, 3 separate galactic regulatory bodies opened formal investigations into the Valhari conquered. The conquered stock price dropped 12% in a single trading cycle, which represented more money than most planetary economies generated in a year. The Galactic Trade Authority issued a cease and desist order to the profit margin, and Commander Valeth had no choice but to stop mining and pull back. She stood on her bridge and looked at the asteroid that still held the tiny ship somewhere in its maze of tunnels, and she knew she had lost. But the Valhari conquered was not done. On day 87, their legal team filed an emergency appeal to have the 90-day rule suspended pending review, arguing that the circumstances were exceptional and that the original auction was fraudulent. The appeal went to a panel of 3 judges. Marcus sat in his kitchen and watched the proceedings on the holographic display, and he could not speak or argue because he was not a galactic lawyer, and he had no legal representation. But he did not need it. The Kruthai judge who had filed the original injunction appeared before the panel as an amicus curiae, which meant friend of the court, and she presented a devastating argument that the Valhari conquered had already violated one court order and could not be trusted to respect another, and that the 90-day rule existed specifically to prevent powerful corporations from using legal delays to steal property from individual operators. The panel deliberated for 4 hours. The appeal was denied. Marcus exhaled. 3 days to go. The profit margin sat in the asteroid belt with its engines idling, and its crew doing nothing because there was nothing left to do. On day 89, Marcus did not sleep. On day 90, he sat at his kitchen table with a cup of fresh coffee and the holographic interface glowing in front of him. And at exactly midnight Galactic Standard Time, a notification appeared. Vessel registration Shenzhou Prime Class Deep Core Excavator Miniaturized, and Unit 774-9, and status changed to irrevocable ownership, confirmed, and registered operator Marcus Devlin Human Sol 3. Marcus read it twice. Then he read it a third time just to be sure. It was his. Legally and permanently and irrevocably his, and no corporation and no court, and no army in the galaxy could take it from him. Out in the asteroid belt, the profit margin received the same notification, and Commander Valeth stood on her bridge and read it, and then she ordered her crew to set a course for home. The gunship turned and accelerated toward the transit gate, and it left the Sol system without sending a single message. Marcus sat alone in his kitchen, and the holographic interface dimmed to standby, and the tiny ship somewhere out in the belt sent a short ping that Zhen translated as a simple 2-word message. We won. Marcus picked up his coffee and took a long, slow sip and looked out the window at the mountains of West Virginia, where the morning light was just starting to touch the ridgeline. Then he smiled and said out loud to nobody in particular, "Yeah, we did." 6 months after the prophet, Margin left the Sol system with its engines running and its pride in pieces. The galaxy looked very different. Marcus Devlin was sitting on the porch of a new house in the hills of West Virginia, and it was a good house with strong walls and a wide porch that looked out over a valley that had once been scarred by strip mining, but was now slowly turning green again, because Marcus had paid for the restoration out of his own pocket. He still lived in West Virginia, because some things do not need to change. The Shenzhou Prime sat on a custom-built landing pad next to his chair, and it was freshly polished and humming the way it always hummed, like a cat purring in the sun. The ship was no bigger than a lunchbox, and it had changed everything. In the months since the ownership was confirmed, Marcus had not slowed down, and he had not rested on his victory, and he had not done what everyone expected him to do, which was to get rich and retire. He had built something. He called it Devlin Extraction Company, but it was not a company in the way that the Valhari Conquered was a company, and it was not a corporation with shareholders and a board of directors and quarterly earnings reports. It was a cooperative, a miners' union. The idea had come to him during the standoff when independent miners from across the galaxy had sent him help and support and jamming codes and legal advice. And he had realized that the problem was not just the Valhari Conquered, and it was not just one corporation. The problem was that across the entire galaxy, small miners and independent operators and struggling colony worlds were being crushed by mega-corporations that controlled the technology and the prices and the markets, and there was nothing they could do about it because they could not afford the equipment. Marcus had the equipment. And more importantly, he had something the Valhari never expected. He had the blueprints. Zhen, as a fully registered ship AI, had legal access to the Shenzhou Prime technical specifications, including the phase fold compression technology that allowed a full-sized mining vessel to be compressed into a miniaturized chassis. The Valhari had kept this technology proprietary for centuries, and they charged prices that only governments and mega-corporations could afford. But the legal access was clear, and Zhen confirmed it 3 times because Marcus asked her to be absolutely sure, and the technology could be licensed and shared under Galactic Trade Authority open patent provisions, as long as the original design was attributed. Marcus did not just share it. He improved it. He partnered with human engineers from universities and trade schools and retired miners who understood the practical side of extraction work, and he brought in friendly alien species who contributed their own expertise, and together they began building a new generation of miniaturized mining vessels. They were not as elegant as the Valhari originals. The hulls were a little rougher, and the edges were not as smooth, and some of them had components held together, with solutions that a Valhari engineer would have considered barbaric. But they worked, and they were cheap. A Valhari Conquered excavator cost more than most colony worlds could earn in a decade, but a Devlin extraction vessel cost a fraction of that price, because Marcus had stripped out every unnecessary luxury and replaced expensive proprietary components with human-engineered alternatives that did the same job for less. The first batch of 50 ships went to independent miners on 12 different worlds. The second batch went to colony worlds that had been paying the Valhari Conquered extortionate rates for resource extraction and could now do it themselves. The third batch went to a coalition of species in the Outer Rim who had been locked out of the galactic mining economy entirely because they could not afford to participate. Within 6 months, the Valhari Conquered mining monopoly that had dominated the galaxy for centuries began to crack. Their prices dropped for the first time in recorded history. Their market share shrank. 3 of their subsidiary companies filed for restructuring. And something else happened that nobody predicted. Earth, which had been a dependent backwater since first contact, suddenly became the most interesting planet in the galaxy. Not because of its minerals, because the galaxy had plenty of minerals. Not because of its military, because Earth had no galactic military to speak of. Earth became important because of its engineers. It turned out that humanity's greatest contribution to the galactic community was not any physical resource, but the uniquely human ability to look at a piece of alien technology that had been built the same way for 1,000 years and say, what if we did it differently? Human engineers did not respect the way things had always been done. They modified and they improvised and they jury-rigged and they duct-taped, and they found solutions that alien species with far more advanced technology had never considered, because those species had never needed to be desperate and creative at the same time. Desperation and creativity turned out to be humanity's superpower. The Valhari built perfect machines that worked exactly as designed. Humans built imperfect machines that worked better than anyone thought possible. Galactic corporations began hiring human engineers not to replace their own workers, but to sit in rooms with them and ask the questions that nobody else thought to ask. What if we turned it upside down? And what if we used half the parts? And what if we built it wrong on purpose and see what happens? The answers changed industries. Marcus watched all of this from his porch with a cup of coffee in his hand and the little ship humming beside him, and he felt something that he had not felt since the day the mines closed. He felt like he belonged. The holographic interface flickered to life, and Jen appeared in her usual form, which was a tiny projection of a Valhari wearing a hard hat, and she had adopted this look after Marcus explained human mining culture to her, and she had never changed it back because she said it felt right. Captain, she said, we have received 47 new contract requests from independent mining operations across 9 star systems. Marcus nodded. She continued, and there is a partnership proposal from the Kruthai Mining Guild, who would like to integrate our extraction algorithms into their fleet operations. Good, he said. And a formal request from the Galactic Trade Authority, asking you to provide testimony before the Monopoly Reform Commission regarding fair access to mining technology. Marcus raised his eyebrows and said, they want me to testify. They want you to tell your story, Captain Jen said, and I believe the human phrase is they want to hear it from the horse mouth, although I do not understand what horses have to do with mining. Marcus laughed and said, it is just an expression, Jen. There was a pause, and then Jen said, one more thing, Captain. Marcus looked at the tiny hologram. The Valhari conquered has sent a communication, she said, and it is not from their legal division this time, and it is from their chief executive. Marcus sat up a little straighter. Jen projected the message, and it was short and written in a tone that was very different from the threatening legal demands he had received months ago. It said that the Valhari conquered recognized the changing market conditions and acknowledged the role that Devlin Extraction Company had played in reshaping the galactic mining industry, and it proposed a full acquisition of Devlin Extraction at a price that Jen converted to Earth currency and displayed on the screen. Marcus looked at the number for a long time. It was a very large number. It was the kind of number that would make any human on Earth wealthy beyond imagination for the rest of their life, and the lives of their children and their grandchildren after that. Marcus thought about it. He thought about the miners in West Virginia who had lost everything when the companies left, and he thought about the colony worlds that were finally able to mine their own resources, and he thought about the independent operators across the galaxy who had sent him help when he needed it most. He thought about what it meant to own something that could not be bought. Tell them, he said, that this company is not for sale. Zhen relayed the message. But Marcus held up a hand and said, "Wait, and tell them one more thing." Zhen waited. "Tell them that if the Valhari Conquered wants to hire Devlin Extraction for contract work, then our rates are very reasonable, and we offer a 10% discount for first-time clients." Zhen made a sound that Marcus had learned was Valhari laughter, and it was a chirping noise like a small bird, and it always made him smile. "Message sent, Captain," she said. Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked out over the valley. The sun was going down behind the mountains, and the light was gold and orange, and the air smelled like pine and fresh earth, and somewhere far above him, invisible to the naked eye, the stars were coming out one by one. Somewhere out there in those stars his little ship was still working, and miners who had never met him were using technology that existed, because a broke unemployed human had spent $47 on an impulse buy and then refused to give it back. The galaxy was enormous and old and full of species that had been traveling between stars for thousands of years before humans figured out how to make fire. But it only took one stubborn miner from West Virginia to remind them all that size does not matter, and money does not matter, and history does not matter. What matters is what you do when someone tells you that you are too small to fight back. Marcus Devlin finished his coffee and set the cup down, and the little ship hummed beside him in the fad. Eing light. Out in the galaxy, the balance of power had shifted, and it had shifted because of a 60-centimeter spaceship and a man who said no. Zhen flickered to life one last time and said, "Captain, shall I power down for the evening?" Marcus shook his head. "Not yet," he said, "and keep the engines warm because tomorrow we have work to do." The AI nodded, and the holographic hard hat bobbed with the motion, and the Shenzhou Prime hummed a little louder as if it was excited. The stars came out over West Virginia, and Marcus Devlin sat on his porch with the most powerful mining tool in the known galaxy sitting next to him, no bigger than a lunchbox. He was a miner. He had always been a miner. And now the whole galaxy knew it.